History class taught you about George Washington crossing the Delaware, but somehow forgot to mention the Viking berserker who ate his enemies' hearts before battle. Or the Japanese samurai who held off 300 warriors with a broken sword and pure willpower. These aren't myths or Hollywood fantasies, these are real warriors, so brutal and effective that modern special forces study their tactics. We're about to explore the most terrifyingly successful fighters who ever lived. Warriors so legendary that their enemies would rather face death than meet them in combat. And fair warning, some of these stories are so intense they make every action movie look like a children's cartoon. These aren't your typical history book heroes. These are the fighters that other fighters had nightmares about. But first, let's start with the warriors who literally lost their minds to win battles. Think your morning coffee gives you energy? Viking berserkers turned pre-battle preparation into an extreme, psychological ritual that would make modern athletes look amateur. These Norse warriors spent days working themselves into a battle frenzy called berserker gang, essentially mastering the art of controlled insanity. Picture this. You're living peacefully on the English coast in 793 AD when longboats appear on the horizon, filled with half-naked warriors biting their shields, foaming at the mouth, and howling like possessed wolves. No armor, no fear, no concept of self-preservation, just pure, calculated rage designed to break enemy morale before the first sword swing. Modern scientists believe berserkers used a cocktail of psychoactive mushrooms, fermented beverages, and ritualistic fasting to achieve this altered state. They were essentially the world's first performance-enhanced warriors, except instead of steroids, they used whatever grew in the Scandinavian forests. The result was fighters who felt no pain, showed no fear, and fought with the strength of wild animals. But here's the genius part. The psychological warfare was just as deadly as their axes. Berserkers would work themselves into such a visible frenzy that entire armies would retreat just from watching them prepare for battle. Enemy commanders knew that fighting berserkers meant their own troops would be facing warriors who genuinely didn't care if they lived or died. In medieval warfare, that level of commitment was absolutely terrifying. But losing your mind for battle is nothing compared to turning every fight into a chess match. Miyamoto Musashi didn't just fight duels. He turned sword combat into pure psychological warfare wrapped in surgical precision. This Japanese samurai won over 60 documented fights without losing once, and his methods were so unconventional they seemed like cheating. Musashi understood that most battles are won before they even start. He would show up hours late to duels on purpose, forcing his opponent to stand in the hot sun, overthinking every possible outcome while their confidence slowly evaporated. By the time he casually strolled onto the battlefield, his enemy was already mentally defeated. Then he'd end the fight in seconds with moves so precise they looked effortless. The ultimate display of his confidence came during his duel with Sasaki Kojiro, considered one of Japan's greatest swordsmen. While sailing to the fight, Musashi carved a wooden sword from a boat oar. His opponent brought his legendary steel blade, perfected techniques, and years of training. Wood won. Because when you understand combat at Musashi's level, the weapon becomes almost irrelevant compared to timing, distance, and mental preparation. He later wrote, "The Book of Five Rings," a strategy guide so effective that modern business executives, military strategists, and professional athletes still study it today. Which explains a lot about why corporate boardrooms feel like battlefields. Musashi essentially created the playbook for winning any competitive situation through preparation, adaptability, and psychological dominance. Speaking of psychological dominance, let's talk about the king who made impossible odds look routine. Leonidas of Sparta looked at the largest invasion force in ancient history and basically said, "Bring more soldiers." When the Persian Empire arrived with an army estimated between 100,000 to 200,000 warriors, so massive it took 7 days just to cross a bridge, most kings would have started writing surrender letters. Leonidas packed a lunch and took 300 of his best friends to go ruin Xerxes' entire day. The genius wasn't in the bravery, it was in the location. Thermopylae was a mountain pass so narrow that Persian numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. It was like forcing an entire ocean through a garden hose. For 3 days, this geographical bottleneck became the ancient world's most exclusive, members-only club. And membership required getting past 300 very motivated Spartans who had literally trained their entire lives for this moment. The Persians tried everything. They sent their elite immortals, their special forces who had never been defeated. The Spartans turned them into very mortal casualties. They launched thousands of arrows hoping to blot out the sun. Leonidas reportedly responded with, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade," delivering what might be history's greatest one-liner in the middle of a life-or-death situation. But the real victory wasn't military, it was inspirational. Leonidas knew he was buying time for the rest of Greece to organize their defense. His sacrifice became the rallying cry that eventually united the Greek city-states and defeated the Persian invasion. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you're willing to lose to win a larger war. But facing impossible odds with style is nothing compared to being so terrifying that empires pay you to go away. Attila the Hun earned the nickname Scourge of God, and absolutely nobody meant it as a compliment. This warrior was so terrifying that the Roman Empire, which had spent 4 centuries conquering most of the known world, literally paid him protection money to stay away from their borders. Attila didn't just conquer cities, he perfected the art of making them disappear completely. His strategy was elegantly simple. Surrender immediately, and maybe some of you survive. Or resist, and become a cautionary tale that parents tell their children for the next 1,000 years. Most cities chose option 1, which tells you everything about his reputation. His Hun army moved across Europe so fast that they seemed to appear out of nowhere. They perfected hit-and-run tactics centuries before anyone had a name for guerrilla warfare. By the time scouts reported Huns in the area, they were already burning down the next town over. Cities would surrender based purely on reputation because everyone had heard what happened to places that tried to fight back. The Romans, who had built their entire identity around military superiority, were so terrified of one man that they essentially turned him into their personal extortion artist. They paid him massive tribute, gave him Roman titles, and even offered him a royal marriage alliance. Imagine being so feared that the world's greatest empire becomes your ATM and starts treating you like family just to keep you happy. But even Attila's reign of terror looks small compared to the warrior who literally changed human genetics. Genghis Khan didn't just build an empire. He created the largest continuous land empire in human history, while fundamentally changing how warfare worked. This Mongolian warrior conquered more territory than Alexander the Great, Napoleon, and Hitler combined, ruling everything from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. His military innovations were centuries ahead of their time. While European knights were still relying on heavy armor and charging in straight lines, Khan's forces used coordinated cavalry attacks, sophisticated siege engines, and psychological warfare that could break enemy morale before the actual fighting started. They were essentially the ancient world's special forces, except they operated on a continental scale. The numbers are absolutely staggering. Historians estimate that Khan's conquests resulted in the elimination of roughly 11% of the world's total population at the time. Some regions didn't recover their population levels for centuries. Cities that resisted were so thoroughly destroyed that archaeologists still struggle to find traces of them today. But here's where it gets really mind-blowing. Modern genetic studies suggest that approximately 0.5% of the world's male population, roughly 16 million men, are direct descendants of Genghis Khan and his close relatives. This one warrior's genetic legacy is still measurable in modern DNA tests. He didn't just conquer territories, he literally altered the genetic makeup of entire continents. Which brings us to the most disturbing realization about all of these warriors. These 5 warriors didn't just change history, they fundamentally altered human civilization and left genetic fingerprints that are still detectable today. But here's what keeps historians awake at night. We only know about the conquerors whose empires lasted long enough to be recorded by survivors. Think about that for a moment. The warriors we just covered might not even be the most dangerous ones who ever lived. They might just be the only ones who left enough witnesses alive to tell their stories. How many other warriors were so thorough in their destruction that they erased not just their enemies, but all evidence of their own existence? And here's the really terrifying question. If these are the warriors who showed mercy enough to let some people survive and record their deeds, what were the ones like who didn't? The rabbit hole goes deeper than you think. Question is, how far down are you willing to go? If you found any of this as fascinating as I did, hit that like button. Drop a comment and let me know which warrior was your favorite or others we should do a part 2 on. Want to dive deeper into how major historical events and stories? Subscribe, because history is full of messy, human stories that are way more interesting than the dumbed-down versions we learned growing up.